All right, so it's late Friday. It's kind of a melancholic moment. Everybody's gone. It's 5:39 on a Friday here at Hofstra. It's been a long day. I just got off of Skype with my colleague Sam Brocha. It was a long day of meetings, so yeah, it's an interesting mood in the air. It's very quiet, actually. It's a good time to do this meditation. So, as I move along here, we're into chapter 4, once again, in Being and Learning. I believe we're up to pages 95 or 90, let's see what it is. Yeah, it's 92 and 93. And Hannah Arendt joined the party yesterday. Her Christ in Education came on board. And so what I was, made my way to Arendt, particularly the Christ in Education, through a discussion where I've kind of revisited the allegory, the first part of it, and talked about sort of what does it mean to dwell in the cave, and there's a certain redemption, right, I'm trying to make with the cave, and not just to understand that the cave itself and the dwelling in the cave is something that is necessarily oppressive, right? That there is this sort of, that what it represents is the roots, if you will, or the below ground, where the roots are, better said. So if you think of the cave dwellers, they're like the roots, and they're rooted under the ground, so that the under the ground is where we find ourselves dealing with what we can call the truth of concealment. And Arendt helps me to talk about the truth of concealment, because she talks about the necessity of the private sphere, the necessity of living, of withdrawing into this place that's outside of the public realm. I mean, the impact of freedom and the impact of action that is one of disclosure of the self. It's felt powerfully because it arrives from a place, and that place is this space of where things are hidden and concealed, right? So disclosure arrives from somewhere. That's the point. So continuing on then with this rethinking and rewriting in some aspects of the allegory of the cave, Plato's allegory of the cave, using Hannah Arendt and her essay, The Christ in Education. So this is material that I wrote this day, the 11th day of April, 2004, and I'm commemorating it 10 years later here in my office at Hofstra, where actually I did very little writing of this material. The majority of the writing happened in my house. At that time I lived in Amityville in 77 Coles Avenue. I did a lot of writing there, the majority of it, and I also did quite a bit at a cafe that was right there in the town. Brownstones is the name of the cafe. So when I wasn't writing there, I was wherever writing, in the same way that I move around doing a lot of writing, videotaping. So far, I've done some taping in Philadelphia, in Chicago, and Albuquerque, not to mention some in New Jersey, as well as Portland, and here in good old Hempstead. So already been a little bit of a tour. Okay. The preservation of natality, as the preservation for the possibility of freedom, entails a conservative modality. The asymmetrical relationship between old-timers and newcomers preserves and cultivates symmetric reciprocity, which appears when learning gets underway. Before this purposeful wandering can get underway, however, the newcomer must be introduced to the world as an already existing horizon that they have appeared within. This introduction is both a preparation and a preservation. A preparation for the activity of freedom, that spontaneous action of making, building, and cultivating a common world, but also a preservation for the natality of the newcomer must be conserved if the capacity to be improvisational is to be actualized. Natality, the modality of the beginner, the initiator, is the essence of learning, being together with others and being. Learning is the actualization or the appearance of natality in the world. In turn, the responsibility of the old-timers is first and foremost to protect and ensure the capacity of the new to begin, to be beginners. Natality, the fact of freedom, the always already existing capacity for spontaneity, creativity, plurality, must be carefully preserved and prepared to make its entry into, quote, a pre-existing world constructed by the living and the dead. Exactly for the sake of what is new and revolutionary in every child, education must be conservative. It must preserve this newness and introduce it as a new thing into an old world. In part 1 of the allegory, we encounter a depiction of the asymmetric relations that prepare for freedom, that preserve the capacity to be an initiator. If the allegory offers us a tale of the initiation of freedom, then this initiation must be understood as a conservation of the revolutionary. Bondage and delusion prepare and preserve liberation and improvisation. How can this be? That bondage and this theater of delusion preserves natality and prepares for freedom. To speak in this way is, of course, to deny the analogy between the story and the historical bondage and oppression that is carried out not in the name of freedom and liberation, but precisely as an institutional denial of it. Understood as a location of preparation, the cave represents the very condition of education or schooling, where the apprentice is formed. The cave is the site of the essential pedagoge holis te psyche, the turning about of the whole human being, which for Plato is the very formation of the philosopher. It's a quote from Heidegger. If the turnings, periagoga, are each a moment in the preparation and actualization of liberation, of the releasement into the proper relationality, then the cave offers the condition for the possibility of each and every turning. From the first turning around to see the cave as a theater, a show, to the fourth and final returning to the cave in search of community. But how does the cave positively represent the condition of possibility? To gather a response to this question, we must take up again the truth of concealment and explore how this manifests as the gradual introduction of the newcomer into the old-timer's world, as the preservation of natality and the conservation of the revolutionary in each child. And that's how it ends. So building, right here what I'm doing is walking now slowly, continuing the slow walk through the allegory of the cave, with this particular point about, I'm still taking up the question of preparation, which I introduced like 4 or 5 days ago. In what way are we prepared to receive the calling to learning, the call to learning? And what I'm, sort of conjectured is that there's this 2 possible ways of looking at that. One is through a kind of messianic, but then I ruled that out because that, as I said, requires that there is a memory of a past before oppression, slavery, that is to say, a time before freedom, and then a prophetic vision of a time afterwards. So the messianic doesn't work. So then the alternative I said was the use of aletheia, which is the Greek word for truth as disclosure and concealment. So it's this play of beings presencing, happening not simply from a space of absence, but it's simultaneous. So, but there's always the point being that we can't unless we're going to talk, and we're not talking about this, about an ecstatic revelation of the totality of being, so which is really an annihilation of the self into being. Short of the mystical, when the human has this encounter, I've emphasized what makes it learning is it's a specifically human encounter. And in that specific human encounter, we only get some part of being or being's presencing is revealed specifically, that is to say, as a human, the human condition of freedom. So this is just a specifically human situation or an offering to the human. Freedom is the specific way in which being's presencing appears to us as human. That's why it defines us in that way. So it's an offering that also claims us, right? So we're claimed by the offering. Really don't have much of a choice. It's what defines us. Now, we have a choice insofar as we could deny it, and we could not accept the offering, or we could simply deny the claim, and then what would that amount to? That would amount to something like renouncing one's name, or the one, with the title that's been bestowed upon one, or one's place. So short of renunciation, then, and so the point here is that going with aletheia, there's a specific disclosure that's happening to the human, and that disclosure of being's presencing is one of human freedom, but all that is not human and the entirety of being that remains sort of quote-unquote not human, or not part of the offering of the human, remains absent. So that's one way to talk about aletheia, as presencing and absencing. So something remains absent. It's also to point us to the fact that the offering of freedom is also one that comes in the form of aletheia, because what we are presented with in the offering is possibility, and what you could call pure potentiality, which is to say, it's an actual offering, but there isn't actuality in the offering. We have to make the freedom, right? That's the point. That freedom is something that we have to do something. Now that we've been claimed as the beings that are free, we have now the responsibility to do something with it. So using Arendt then is to talk about that. It's to say that the child is in a way in this pure potential state, right? So in a way they are the offering, right? The student, the apprentice, is the offering, and I've talked about this in terms of the offering of teachability, is what the student or the apprentice or the child offers, right? So they are closer, if you will, to the original insofar as they're so new. So our role as the quote old-timers, right, as the teachers, is to accept that offering, but it's also to hold back the enactment, the doing something. I think that's Arendt's point. So we have to, in a way, keep the enactment of freedom in a state of holding, or we have to hold it back so that it's properly prepared. So the preparation is holding back, and that's the point. And that's why I'm suggesting that the truth of concealment, which is really, for Arendt, it's the concealment of the world. That's her point, that what school is, just to use that as a venue, is a concealment of the world. It's a holding back of the young person, of that freedom that wants to leap into the world. It's a holding it back, and it's a preparation of it to do something that's going to be, and this is where the sort of imperative of the ethical, and in a certain sense the imperative of justice too, arises. I call conservative education the ethic of sustainability, or even the justice of sustainability, because it seems to me that what Arendt is suggesting is that the direction, what education is going to be, which is going to be something different than learning, right? So learning is the pure enactment of freedom, and it's that modality. Education then becomes the direction of learning towards a certain particular ethical and political, or to the question of justice, and to the question of the good. And in both cases, that education is directed towards sustainability, and and the ethos of conservation, right? So there is sort of preservation, conservation, and sustainability, so that whatever we're doing, that we're offering, that we're making rather, in learning, if we're educated, then our learning is directed towards this particular project, which is one of sustainability and conservation, right? So that we're not just bringing things into the world to just add to it. We're certainly not adding things to a market, and we're not participating in manufacturing. So all that gets tied in. But that's kind of far from where this particular meditation goes, where I'm just sort of building through Arendt's language further discussion of the truth of concealment as the conservation of and preservation of natality, which she says is what the newcomer has. And so for me, natality and freedom are sort of two sides of the same coin, and that's why Arendt is so crucial and important to this project. All right, so I'm going to end it here on the 11th day of April 2014, commemorating the writing from this day 10 years ago.